Okay, well, people still trickle in. I'm gonna go ahead and kick this off a little bit, and we'll go from there. So, hello everyone. My name is Colin Potts. I work here at Jabali. I'm our head of AI game tech. So, hello everyone. I'm also the lead on the studio product that we've been using for the jams and that we're going to be talking about today. So, I want to kind of give some context for what this class is going to be. This is part of a 3-class series that we're doing for the next round of the game jam, but we've previously done 2 other ones before this. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the product and some different features. But for the most part, today we're going to go in a little bit of a different direction, and we're going to talk more generally about game design, and specifically how to take that game design knowledge and how to interact with Bali inside of Studio to kind of like have those conversations, develop game design documents, and really kind of like how do you communicate your design intent? How do you talk about it in a way such that Bali is going to understand what you're trying to create? And how, more generally, should you be thinking about specific pieces like mechanics, risk-reward systems, and the different aspects that kind of make games fun? And which ones do you want to particularly focus on in whatever game that you're choosing to create? So give me one moment here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can people see that? How does the size look?
Looks good.
Okay. So yeah, let's start off a little bit talking about what kind of aspects do you want to be talking about for a game, and how are we going to get Bali to talk about those aspects? So the first one, talk about like just what makes a good game experience. There's a bunch of different aspects here, and I just want to kind of go through a few of them at a high level, and then talk about specifically which ones I'm prompting about here. Go through a few of them. So here, when the first message you're going to see is just my initial prompt, and I want to highlight a few things here. I'm trying to be very clear about some of the mechanics that I want. So I'm saying, first off, for instance, 2D RPG. This is really setting the complete context for where we're going to go. I've used this kind of strong biasing to the LLM. It now knows exactly kind of like the general set of mechanics that we're going to want. So this is kind of setting up the kind of some of the core mechanics, right? 2D RPG, going around solving puzzles. Talking a little bit about some of the tech stuff here, just so that like we can get started. But then I'm also kind of going into what the experience is going to be when I'm talking about like I want these cutscenes, a little bit of technical detail about them. A small part here is really the concept. Like, what is it about this game that's going to make it unique and that I want? And then the last piece of this prompt is important. What I'm really being clear about here is that I don't want Bali to just create. I want to really have a discussion first, so that we can really both have a common understanding of what's going on in the project. So the key things that you want to be thinking about, like a couple that I've mentioned here: core mechanics, game loop. What is going to be the reward and motivation? So here it's going to be this idea of like solving these puzzles, and we're like getting these glimpses of the past. That's the kind of like the core piece there. Other aspects you would want to also think about are things like balance and fairness and like having some sort of risk. We haven't quite gotten there. And so what we're going to do in this discussion with Bali is we're going to start like trying to fill out some of those other aspects. So Bali kind of understands like the general thing. And then I make it clear that I want to talk about specific details here. Because one of the things that Bali will be happy to do at any point in time is at any point in time, you can say, you know what, you make these decisions. I've given you all the input I want to give. I just want to confirm and go ahead. But here I want a little bit more input because I want to show you kind of a way that you can really kind of go into that. And so talking about the reward design and the motivation is where I want to start. And I want to be clear that in this game, the primary reward for the player is going to be in the form of these story beats. Now, different games and different concepts you have are going to have different reward systems. It is very important that you think kind of carefully about what that reward system is going to be, and then you should make sure that you're including that in the game design document, that you're communicating that to Bali, to the co-pilot, so that it understands kind of where you're going. Without that, it's going to kind of make some guesses. It's going to try to fill it out. It has an understanding of a lot of these concepts, and so it'll kind of work with you. But you really want to be careful about what that kind of reward system is. For instance, in a lot of platformers, your reward might be new abilities. That's kind of a classic thing in Mario or Ori and the Blind Forest, a lot of those types of games where you are kind of getting these new abilities as you progress, and it's kind of like fun new mechanics to discover, and that's the reward. So here I'm making it clear that I want to talk about the story beats, and so Bali correctly surmises that we're going to talk about this kind of narrative arc. It's kind of prompting me like, how exactly do we want to structure this? And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to be very explicit about some of the story beats that I want to have and like what that is going to look like. I want to encourage you when you're talking with Bali to like really get specific about the details that are important to you. So if there's something that is going to make your game unique, you should focus on that. So right here, the thing that's going to make this game interesting is the story. And so that's where I'm going to spend a lot of time in this prompting. But if, for instance, some games are unique based on their art style, like the mechanics might be relatively run-of-the-mill, but it's a really cool art or it's a really cool sound design. Really just take the time to focus on the piece that you find most interesting and you're going to like use to differentiate your game and really kind of hone in there before you get too far ahead. Okay, so I've provided this very basic structure of like what I want these acts to look like. Bali is going to come back and helping me refine this into like a really solid 5-act structure. One of the things that we're also starting to hear is we're starting to refine what the mechanics are going to be. So we're going to have these dig sites. We're going to be moving around. This is kind of a summary of what's going to happen at those dig sites. And for instance, Bali has a question here where it's like, okay, is this the right number? So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start kind of digging down a little bit deeper. So we have this concept where there's going to be these dig sites that are kind of corresponding to each story beat. And it's like, and we know that there's going to be puzzles, but now it's like really kind of honed in. And so now I'm being specific, like, okay, 2 to 3 minor puzzles, 1 larger puzzle, and then we're going to start getting into the actual like mechanics and movement, how you're getting in here. I want to point out this is all before we're really like diving into the building of the game, because we really want a solid foundation here. We want to have thought through some of these details before we get too far into it. You're certainly welcome to use the product and just say like, no, go ahead and build it right now, if that's the way that helps you iterate. But for this class, I really want to talk about how to really think carefully about the design, what aspects that you would want to talk about, how you want to prompt so that you can get a really solid game design document. That document is going to be used by the AI to really guide everything that it does. So the more complete it is, the kind of better control you're going to have going forwards in terms of building out that game. So as we're building out this game, like the core thing that we've kind of talked about here is we have these dig sites. I've talked about it being a 2D RPG, and we want to like dig in. What is this going to look like? How are we going to iterate here? And so we're going to do like a world map. Within each one, we're going to be able to like explore around in there. What's new, like I've talked about puzzles, but like how are we actually doing those transitions? What do we want the UI styling to look like? And then this is a really important one, is like, what is the player's actual agency? So what are the interactions they actually get with these puzzles, with the world? What are they allowed to choose and not choose? So I'm going to go here and be specific. I'm going to say that, like, some of these ideas I really like suggesting a journal. I'm like, yeah, that's great. Wants to know if you can just kind of click around to any random site. I'm going to say, no, we're going to kind of go in order. They're going to unlock in sequence. Once I've gotten that, Bali's going to once again summarize for me, kind of ask a few follow-up questions. And then once we've gotten all of that, what we have arrived at is what our core game loop is going to be. This is going to be an important thing that you want to settle for any game, because this is really like, what is the player doing most of the time? So the overworld and all of that is kind of like extra stuff. The core thing here that Bali's helped me summarize is we're going to arrive in our world, we're going to explore, we're going to find clues, we're going to solve the minor puzzles, solve the main puzzle, we're going to get that reward, which is our cutscene, which is going to tell us about some of the evidence, because we're this paleontologist kind of discovering dinosaurs, and then head back to the world map. And we're going to kind of repeat that. But this kind of is really succinct, and we know kind of what is the main focus for that core loop, and we also have what is going to be the larger structure. From here, the next piece that we're gonna iterate on is kind of just going one level deeper. Like I've talked about mini games, I've talked about puzzles. Which ones? What does that mean? Here, I'm actually going to let Bali kind of choose that for me, instead of being specific. I don't have a strong preference for this one, but I could have like kind of dove in there if I wanted. At this point, this is when I actually have selected my template, and it's going to start kind of creating some code. Because of the way that I prompted here, the very first thing that we're doing is we're writing this game design document. And I have a quick summary here, but let me actually pull up that document to kind of give you an idea of what all of this interaction gave us. So what we have now are some very specific stuff. We have specific art style. We know some of the themes. We have what we want the writing style to be, what the setting is. It's kind of summarized the concept nicely for us. It's including then each section here that we've walked through. So we have an explicit section here, like what the narrative arc is going to be. We have an explicit section about the game loop. We have what the mechanics are going to be of the different kind of pieces. We have the puzzle system, we have the world map, the dig site exploration, cutscenes, journal, notebook. One thing I kind of glossed over that I also worked with Bali on when I was building this game is we talked about how we want there to be NPCs, what kind of dialogue they're going to have, what role they play in the story. And then also we have a kind of a rough sketch of like what those characters are going to look like. We haven't really gone into detail there yet. A rough sketch of the dig sites. We have a structured thing for what the UI elements are going to be, an initial control set. So what I really before we really dug in, we've made it on design, starting the game. We're going to be a lot less surprised by details. A couple of things I want to also highlight about how you can use Studio here is when it stopped here, it said like, hey, you know, here's the game design document. I read through it, I was happy with it, so I told it could proceed. At this point, I could have looked through this and said, you know what, I don't like the art direction, I don't like the audio direction, some particular piece of it, and I could prompt specifically saying like what changes that I want. Another feature of Studio is I can also come in right here in this markdown file, and I can edit as much as I want. I can just rewrite what I want the art direction to be, for instance. There's nothing like limiting me to only be able to work in the chat. I can make the change directly if there's something that I want. And I would just, if I had done that, I would just let Bali know and be like, hey, you know, I've kind of made these changes. This is the direction that we want. But as you can see, we kind of have a lot of stuff here. When I finished this, originally there was no version history because it hadn't actually built. But then after I started build out, it's going to kind of add that in. And just to note to everyone, feel free, if you have questions, put them in the chat. Also, feel free to speak up. interrupt. I'm happy to make this as interactive as people want. So yeah, once I have this structure, as you can see here, there's different pieces. Some are preliminary, some need to be refined, but we don't necessarily have to refine them all yet. We're going to actually let Bali start building out the code. One of the things that I want you to think about when you're working with Bali is that you are kind of taking the role of a game studio director. So you are the one kind of saying what it is that we want to build. And then Bali is going to fill in the rest of the typical studio roles. So the first one that it was doing is it was helping me by being a writer. And that's how we got like this whole act structure. It also helped me out with a bit of being a game designer by like helping refine these mechanics. The next piece that it's the kind of role that it's filling here is it's actually filling the role of a developer. So it's actually writing some GD scripts because we're building a game in Godot, and it's getting this all kind of set up and prepared. And as you can see, it's writing quite a number of large number of files to kind of get this. Um, and this is where you have where the script is the logic that runs, and the scene file is just kind of the visual elements that are going to be there. So here it's filling out this developer role. And as you can see, it's going to kind of give me updates of the different pieces that it's doing. And it's going to be working through this game design document and trying to add preliminary versions of really kind of all of the stuff there. So as you can see, we've wrote quite a lot of stuff. It's also going to make sure that it's periodically updating the README so that we know what the structure is. Oh, I don't want the puzzles README. I want the main README. Here it is. So as you can see here, one of the things it's going to do is it's going to keep us updated on progress. So these are the things that we've implemented, in progress, things that are planned for the future. A little bit about what the actual structure is going to be, where files are going to live, and it's going to kind of keep working on that. This is going to be a more developer-focused piece than the game design document. Bali should be keeping both up to date as it progresses, but we can certainly reach out and ask for specific updates if we want to. The next thing I want to point out in terms of like features of when you're working with Bali is that after it wrote all of this, which is quite a lot of stuff, one of the things that it's going to do is it's going to build the project. And this is actually when it's also going to do some self-healing. While Bali is pretty good at getting things right on the first shot, as with any developer, you're going to make mistakes. Bali is going to make mistakes. And so when this happens, it can self-heal. It can see, oh, I forgot to define some of these resources. Let me clean that up, rebuild. I was going to kind of go into this loop a little bit and see how it needs to do some of these auto loads and so on. And then once it's done, it was like, oh, okay, cool. We have a complete preview. We have it here. We haven't actually generated any of the assets yet, so this is going to be a very kind of simple thing. But you can see here we have this initial string. We have a title. We have the nice little subtitle and some pieces going on there. So before we dive too much farther into this, I'm going to take a brief pause. I'm just going to talk more generally about some studio features and kind of like the whole picture now that we've seen kind of how to get to that first game. But like I said, any point in here, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. Okay, so first kind of a few things that we were showing here. Like I said, we're really focusing just on this chat view and kind of the discussions that we're having there. I haven't used any of these suggestions yet, but I want to point out that if you're stuck and you're kind of like not sure which way to go, you're going to have these suggestions here. These are going to be based on kind of the current thread, and they're also going to be based on like your progress in that game. Here on the Layouts tab, you'll be able to see all of your scene files like kind of organized in one place. If they're visual scene files, you would be able to kind of open them up in a 2D editor. However, most scene files here are going to be more data representations, or the content's going to be dynamically generated, so there's not really much to see. I've already kind of showed you this view where we have all of our source files. The things that I want to highlight here are we have, for instance, all of the different scripts. I guess our main initialization doesn't need much going on. We have different README files, for instance, for inside the cutscenes. It's giving me a little bit of structure of like what's going to be going on. It's saying like, hey, we need these images, but we haven't actually created them yet. Kind of tracking those pieces. We have specific scripts set up to like how to like run our different particular scenes. Lots of kind of pieces going on there. Another thing I want to point out is we have the ability to do some model selection. So similar to a lot of other AI tools you may have used, there are a number of powerful LLMs that I can select to use in the background. There's going to be some trade-offs here in terms of performance, like quality of outputs versus speed. Different models also have different biases, might be working on particular types of projects. I want to make sure that I highlight here, though, that we have added a lot of customization on top of these. You're going to get a fairly consistent Bali experience, regardless of which model you're choosing here, and the way that it can interact with the project, the way it's going to think about the project, and so on. The other piece that I want to highlight is that I've actually put it into creative mode. We have 4 core modes that you can choose from. In creative mode, I found it useful when I'm really iterating on the design document to begin with. It's also in that mode biased to really kind of go write things without asking a lot of questions. Like you can see from the number of bugs that it's tried to fix and the number of things that it has edited, that it's really kind of done a lot without necessarily asking for confirmation. If you'd prefer to ask for confirmation, you can always go to a cautious mode or a collaborative mode where it's going to have kind of varying levels of confirming with you before it writes files and so on. And you also can feel free to swap between those modes depending on where you are inside of the project. Like at the very beginning, an autonomous mode or a creative mode might make sense, but later on in your development process, when you're just like working on like a little small refinements, you're probably going to want to be more specific in your prompting, and you're going to want to maybe go into a more of a cautious mode with the AI. For completeness, you have also a lot of customization power over the AI settings. So like I said here, which we can also select the mode. We have kind of more detail about why you might choose different models. And then the last piece here is we have these instructions. So if there are particular ways that you want Bali to interact with you, this is where you would add it. This is kind of a per project thing. This could be something about your prompt if you just really want something to always remain kind of on top of mind for Bali, to like if there's some really important instruction. You also, if there's just a pattern of behavior that you want, like you could put in the instructions here that if you really like more of a planning flow, you could add an instruction here that says, before you act, I want you to create a plan. I want you to just share that with me as a to-do list. You could even say you want it to keep it up to date in a file or something. Really got kind of a lot of control over how the agent is going to interact with you. If this is more detailed than you want, feel free to never come here and customize. If you also have particular things about Bali's behavior that you want to change and you're not sure how to go about that, feel free to ask us and we can help kind of provide you some guidance on what custom instructions you might want to provide. We're happy to provide examples there. So the core piece here is that, like I said, we have this preview view and we have the kind of the main chat. Let me see, we have one question in the chat. Let me answer that real quick. So the question is, to make smaller changes like changing text or background image, are we limited to the LLM speed, or is there a better way to interact with the scene? So there are visual ways to interact with the scenes if there are interactive elements. That'd be through this layout view. The way that it's set up this one, none of this is going to be particularly interactive. The reason being the type of layout that is used, for instance, for this main screen. If I pull it up, the way that it's done all of these layouts is that they're all anchored and using layout controls, like the VBox and so on. And so these elements aren't draggable. So there's nothing to edit in that kind of that 2D sense. However, these are customizable kind of at this level. If you have that Godot knowledge, you feel free to go in and make manual modifications here. Like I could update the horizontal alignment. I can change any of this text. And if I change it here, all I have to do is hit save, go back to the previous screen and rebuild, and it will be updated. So you can make kind of edits directly into the code files. Like I said, some of them will be visually editable. In this game, I don't have any kind of examples of that, just from the way that it's decided to build it. We are working on adding more features to make more of these things interactable, so that you can do things like customizing the color and text without having to kind of jump to these files. And then certainly if there are particular code changes and you're familiar with how Go works, you're more than welcome to come in here into the code and directly start making modifications. This editor is fairly featured. I can always open up the command palette. Like I said, there's lots of different functionality that's supported within it. Fully featured code editor. I can even do things like finding, replacing, really whatever I want to do for kind of direct interactions there. So no, not limited to the LLM speed, and we're continuing to work on kind of improving the other ways that we allow you to interact with these things too. I'm all the way there. One thing I would notice that any of the changes that are happening to these files, we also provide kind of a complete view of. So this file was just created. So there's not like a long history here, but another file, if I looked at, say, the README, and I looked at the history there, I can see that kind of multiple updates have been made. Kind of as we're progressing, I can always jump back between those. So if you branch out and do some manual edits or some small changes and you want to revert them, that's the easiest way to do that on a per file basis. And then once you've published a project, you can also kind of revert between published versions. So your published version will kind of show up here once it's ready, and you'll be able to iterate on that. Did that answer your question? Okay, perfect. Feel free to keep kind of asking questions as we go along here. Yeah, I want to talk, I guess, go back a little bit to what makes a good game design document. So the kind of key things that you really want to cover in there is you want to have the overview / concept. You want to really make sure you're iterating on that core gameplay loop, making it clear what those interactions should be. Any story information you want to provide there, you should start kind of digging in. Art direction is another one that you really want to kind of have set up. In particular, if you start asking Bali to generate assets before you've settled on an art direction, you might be kind of surprised by what it generates. It's going to make its best guess. So better to kind of make sure we're kind of thinking about that clearly. So we got another question. Can we upload custom models? And if so, what kind of 3D models can Bali work best with? Yeah, so we support a fairly large set of models. It depends for 3D models, that is. So in Studio, you can either build projects right now with Phaser, or you can build projects with Godot. Phaser is a 2D only engine, so you're not going to be able to really do much there. You might have some success like embedding kind of 3D views within the 2D world, but we'll focus on Godot for this question since it's an actual 3D engine. So we support every model format that Godot supports, which is a lot. I think there's about 10. So that would include OBJ files, FBX files. It includes GLBs, GLTFs. If you upload one of those to your project, we also have built-in support for that. So in the assets pane, if I had a 3D model here, I don't have any assets yet, but if I had a 3D model, I would actually be able to open it up, preview it. Bali works pretty well with any of those formats. You might be a little bit careful if you use a text format. If you're using a text format for one of these models, Bali might try to help you update that file. Only if you asked for it, but just a word of caution. It can do, for instance, it can create very simple OBJ text files for some like really simple models. Like if you want a really simple spaceship or something, it can do that. We are also working on adding support for 3D model generation. That's not there yet. I want to give also a note on two special 3D formats that Godot supports. So one, I said that we supported all of the same models as Godot. That's true with one caveat. Godot supports blend files from Blender directly, but only if you have Blender installed. We do not ship like any Blender support as part of the studio. So if you were building a model in Blender, I would recommend exporting it to a GLB or GLTF or something like that before importing it. And then the last format that we support for models is that Godot can take a model and encode it directly into a scene file. And we also have support there. You might have, sometimes that gives you a little bit better performance. Other times, keeping the model file in a binary format might be better. Regardless of when you build it, they're all going to be packaged into a native format for the like built binary that's going to be played by players. Anything more I can answer there on 3D models, or is there any particular like features that you'd like to see us add along those dimensions? So you can do basic mesh collisions. So that is kind of built into the physics engine. And Bali's gonna be able to kind of reason about that. Okay, if you had a really complex model with a lot of internal meshes, that'd be a little bit more complicated for it. It does not have the ability to automatically rig something for animations. So if you uploaded say a humanoid model, and you wanted Bali to animate that to have it walking, it would really struggle to be able to do that for you off the bat. However, if the model was rigged, so like you can upload animations and stuff in some of these formats, it is able to access those. You might, for some of these, if it's a binary format, it's not going to necessarily be able to read and do a lot of understanding on the binary formats, versus the text formats it would be able to kind of look at and figure out. But the simplest thing would be if you had a pre-rigged model and you upload it, you can just say, here's my model, here's the details about it, and then Bali will be able to kind of integrate that into the game for you. And then certainly if it's just a a model that doesn't require any like joints or animations or anything like that, that'd be a lot simpler. Yeah, happy to answer those questions. If you're also looking for examples of how to do some of those things, a number of our games, so any of the 3D starters are going to include a model in TSCN format with a little bit of rigging and like showing you kind of how to work with that. That'll kind of give you some clues of how to get started. Bali is also perfectly capable of kind of telling you how to work with those details if you just kind of ask more informational questions versus asking it to make specific changes. And then if you want looking for even more complicated examples, we have several 3D templates and a number of different like 3D games that we're starting to release as part of the platform. And so those have some more complex examples of how to do things. Okay, I want to go back a little bit to talking about a little bit of prompting here, in particular prompting around these kind of game design documents. So specifically, when we're building a game, one of the trade-offs we want to talk about is kind of risk versus reward, like I said before. And specifically, when you're prompting, instead of saying like, I could say here or something like, add a fall mechanic. This is probably going to be too vague. Like, sure, Bali can go do that, but there's not as much of a purpose here. Versus if I was really looking to expand the mechanics, I might instead phrase this as update the game design document with a new ball mechanic. Help me come up with a risk reward structure that makes sense for adding this. So by just being a little bit more specific and kind of grounding this, I'm going to get a little bit better result. I'm going to be prompting Bali to actually think about this mechanic and how it's going to work. You want to think of Bali and AI assistants in general as, for the most part, they're going to do their best to do whatever it is that you ask. But if you ask them to act a bit more intentionally and you ask them to have a bit more kind of self-reflection, in particular in this example, if I'm asking it to like ground my request in the context of the entire design of the game, I'm going to get better results. It's going to feel like a more cohesive game. Because the Copilot is happy to go about things. One of our games that we built, someone on our team prompted Bali to build a 4D game, like not a 3D game, but a 4-dimensional game. And it went and it tried, and it was interesting. And so really whatever it is you're asking it to do, it will try and go do. So you want to be intentional about how you're asking things. Another thing that you can do is if you notice that there's a particular part of the game that's not developed, like if you don't think you've developed well the progression system, then you could kind of prompt specifically for that. So if I go to one of my games that I've built before, like this one here, that doesn't really have a progression system. Design pillars. Name the file something different here. I have like some details of like what I want the experience to be, but I don't necessarily have the particular progression and growth that the player is going to have. And so I can actually specifically prompt for that. Like first I can say analyze the player progression in my game and make suggestions to help the player feel more accomplished. So when you use specific terms to game design, what you're really going to be doing is you're going to be leveraging Bali's intelligence about that specific concept, which can be useful. Versus when you're not using that specific language, Bali's going to have to kind of guess a little bit more about what you mean. And like I said here, this is, some things that I knew, but I wanted to kind of highlight that Bali is able to help you here. So in this game that I had started, it was a very much like a vertical slice of a game, like a prototype. So it's correct. There is no progression in the game so far. There's no abilities that you're getting, no real visible changes. It's like one level, I guess maybe two levels. But real progress for this game would be adding in some sort of progression here. And I want to kind of highlight that by just asking about that specifically, and specifically asking Bali to kind of self-reflect, I'm able to kind of get this kind of complex analysis of what's going on. And a lot of this, like, this is partly a reflection on what I've asked Bali to do, and partly a reflection on just what it's done. That when you're prompting for that self-reflection, in particular when you're prompting it relative to aspects of the games, you can get a lot of kind of interesting insights. Yeah, and it's correctly identified, like I said, several of the aspects here, and made some specific recommendations of what it wants to do. And I think I have this in autonomous mode, so it's probably going to go ahead and start integrating some of this and kind of keep moving forward. The other thing that it managed to highlight here, even without me specifically prompting, is that you want to think carefully about your oh, sorry, I had to sneeze there for a second. You want to think carefully about like different feedback systems. And so it already noticed like, hey, there's no visual feedback here. But that could have been another aspect that I'm specifically asking about, that I could say, hey, what is my feedback system? What do you think about it? How can we kind of design that a little more carefully? And it will continually like take those things, update them back into the main document so that we can kind of keep that context moving forward. Another the detail I kind of want to highlight here is there are different kind of aspects that you can add if you're more specific. Like one of the things I asked for when I was building this game is that instead of asking it to just add in a background, like I didn't just say, hey, this game doesn't have a background yet. I instead was a bit more specific and I asked it to add in a parallax background, which is a particular style like you would see in like a Mario platformer where there are different kind of layers that move at different speeds. And so for this game, it has a nice parallax background piece, and it generated these three images. It composited them appropriately and has them scroll at different speeds as you're moving around. So just that little bit of specificity when you're prompting can really get you a lot of benefit. So if I go back to my other game here, like one of the things that I might say is, let's start working on visual assets. Can you review the design spec and make a suggestion for a first set. In particular, I'd like background for the main screen, maybe. So here I've specifically asked it to kind of review that game design document again. It's going to be in context. You don't always have to explicitly prompt for that. But certainly if you made any like manual things that you could do that. And so here, it's going to start helping me prioritize kind of like what that set's going to be. Title screen background makes sense to me. Core UI assets, yeah, this all sounds reasonable. So this is going to be generating me kind of a static background, which makes sense for that first screen. Other types of prompting I can do to be specific there is at some point I have to decide how I'm going to create the 2D visuals for the world. And I can just ask it to say like, hey, create the visuals for the 2D world, which is fine. Like that's a way to get started. But what I might want to do instead is be specific of like, hey, I really want to build this out using sprite sheets or a tile map, and kind of be really kind of particular about how I want to do that, how I want to describe those worlds. One of the ways that I've, for instance, done this in the past for the 2D world would be asking it to write the worlds in just ASCII, so that I have a little text file that I can modify to change what the worlds are looking like, and then it will automatically kind of tile them out from there. I've mentioned before that we do have a visual editor, so like that is also an option of a way to go, but that might be a little bit more complicated, particularly for larger worlds. Plus, often the ASCII tile maps are something that Copilot understands well, and it would be able to kind of do a good job generating for you. So we have about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure that if there are other questions that we're kind of addressing those as we go along. Otherwise, I'm going to kind of just keep walking through a few different like kind of pieces that I would want to add to this game. I can also walk through a few different Studio features if there's anything there that people are curious about, or if you've been using Studio and there's something particular that you want to know more about how to use or have been having trouble with, feel free to bring that up as well. Yeah, I think this one looks good. So I'm going to ask you to do a little bit more of a complicated visual here now. Just so if we can get like a little bit of motion for the main screen. A little more complicated of an ask. We'll see how well it kind of goes about it here. are prompting one of your core concept and your story or your mechanic whenever you're kind of making requests for larger changes. So for instance, here, if I didn't have like the movement system yet that we discussed from the game design document, I would be specific being like, hey, take this movement section for this particular part. I want you to go implement that. It's also very helpful in terms of prompting to provide acceptance criteria where you can be specific and say, I want you to build this, and this is what complete is. So for instance, for movement here, I could say movement I'll consider complete when I can use the WASD keys to move my character around. I can see visual feedback. There's logging about the player position, and there maybe I can say that and there's a sprite that I can like visually see. Or maybe I want to say and the player collides properly with some walls. If I'm specific about all of those conditions that I want it to satisfy, it's going to put the Bali in a state where it's going to write that initial code and then it's going to self-evaluate whether or not it's kind of met your criteria, which will save you a little bit of time of asking it to do something and then tech checking and being like, hey, actually I wanted this or it's not quite complete. But in general, I think one of the things I want you to take away from this class is before you ask Bali to build something, ask yourself like, why should that particular thing exist? What interaction, what choice is it giving to the player? How is it going to change the player's experience over time? And in particular, when I'm adding something, what is the feedback that the player is going to get based on that mechanic? So if I am adding a fall mechanic, how does the player know they fall? How do they know, for instance, if there's fall damage, how do they understand what that fall damage is? That when you think about it a little bit more that way and you're giving Bali prompts that are including all of those details, you're going to be building games that are more fun, that players are going to be able to understand a little bit more intuitively. One of the things that we see often from games is that it's not intuitive how to play them. Like it's not intuitive what the controls is, it's not intuitive what the goal is, it's not intuitive when things are happening, like when the player is taking damage, versus adding visual indicators, adding health bars, adding little tips when you first walk into a room, like highlighting a goal, adding little cutscenes explaining how to make things work. All of those can go a long way towards making a better game experience. Oh, nice. These bones look good. Let's go ahead and add those back to these games. And we have just a few more minutes. So like I said, if there's any questions, happy to answer those. While this is working, one thing I want to note is that we have a particular bias kind of in our prompting and how we want Bali to work on things in terms of how to structure a project. However, you're free to add to those custom instructions that we're talking about. If you like a particular project structure or design philosophy, you can also add that information to your README and other places. And to kind of modify that. Oh yeah, there we go. That is pretty much exactly what I wanted. So you can see here, just gonna kind of like highlight some of the different prompting strategies that we've done throughout here. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So we started by trying to be specific about some of the details about the game, what our concept is, and particularly I'm being specific about how I want Bali to respond. that this is really one of the important pieces, that I'm being specific, that I want to talk about design first before implementation. If instead I want implementation first, I'm free to prompt that as well. But the more specific you are about how you want Bali to interact with you, the more reliably you're going to get those interactions that you want. The next piece of kind of like some summary here is we're talking about design, right? And I'm really focusing on the different aspects of that game design document that I want first. Like I'm talking about the important aspects of what this particular concept are. And the main one here is about the story, less about the gameplay. So we spend some time there, really set up what that act structure is going to be and what the game's going to end up looking like. Next, I was diving into mechanics and being very clear about the different transitions and the different pieces that we kind of want to work through there. Then we dove in a little bit more, talking about some specifics about the interactions until we could kind of get to a complete core game loop that we were kind of happy with, a rough draft of what that structure is going to be, an idea of what the specific like puzzles and mini games are going to be for this example, which is like really getting into the specifics. And then building out that full document, doing a little review before we really dive in and start generating all of the code. And then generating it all, scaffolding it out, doing some iteration till we have that first piece. And then going back to that game design document, being like, okay, what's the next piece that we want to work on? And really using that as a roadmap for where to go. Which helped us generate a few things. We have these different images and got us a fun little title screen here. Okay, we are right at time. I am happy to stay on a little later if there are specific questions that people have. Otherwise, I can let everyone go. We will continue to monitor Slack. Will be, or sorry, not Slack. Discord will be here to answer any of your questions. If you're having issues, feel free to let us know. And you can all look forward to more updates to Studio. We should be hopefully releasing one today.